Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network's Heritage Talks online program. My name is Heather Darch, and I'm here with Glenn Patterson, and we are project directors for the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network, otherwise known as QAN. We welcome you to our series with its theme, Dreaming Big, inspiring stories from across Quebec's heritage community. We have invited organizations from across Quebec to tell us their inspiring stories. And it's been exciting to hear from the historical societies, museums, community groups, and cultural organizations and cultural groups whose vision has had a lasting impact on Quebec's history and heritage. QAN is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to preserve, protect, and promote the history and heritage and culture of Quebec, and in particular of Quebec's English-speaking communities that are spread right across the province. You're welcome to become a member of QAN, and membership is open to everyone, including community groups and networks. So please check our website for more information about becoming a member, and you can go to our website at qahn.org. Membership gives you access to interesting workshops and programs and projects and publications, and it gives you information to what the network itself is doing, what research is being done, and what individuals are doing out there. And it also allows you access to our quarterly publication called Quebec Heritage News. And this is filled with articles and images about Quebec's history. So I encourage you to become a member, receive your own copy of Quebec Heritage News, and read more about our history and diverse heritage, and more importantly, join our really great dynamic network of people and organizations right across Quebec. For first-time new members, you can take advantage of a 30% discount tonight. That's $20 for a one-year membership. And all you have to do is send us a message in Facebook Live, or if you're on Zoom tonight, in the chat box that you're interested in becoming a member, and we'll send you the instructions on how to do that. It's only good for the time that we're on the broadcast, though, so don't wait. If you want to become a member, make sure you get your name in. I would like to thank our funders who helped make this series possible, including Canadian Heritage, the Zeller Family Foundation, the Chalkers Foundation, and the Townshippers Foundation. All of our presentations are recorded, and so if you've missed any, or you would like to see the series from last year, you can go to the Heritage Talks Facebook page, and you can find the whole lineup of what's happened and what is to come in our series. And you don't need your own Facebook page. It's a public site, so you can just go there and see our entire series laid out for you. I'll introduce you to Glenn now, because he's going to talk to you a little bit about some of the tech that you'll need to know for tonight's presentation. Hi, Glenn.
Hi, Heather. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Yes, I'm here helping with the tech. The most important thing for you is the chat box if you're having any problems. So if you're on a computer that's down at the bottom of the Zoom window, you can type a question to everyone or just address it to me. If you're on a mobile device on Zoom, you may have to tap the screen once, and then there might be a menu that says more, and under there, you'll see the chat box. You can use that. The other thing I want to point out is that we are recording this call, and it is being simultaneously broadcast to both Facebook Live and YouTube. So if you're uncomfortable with that, if you don't want your video or name accidentally being on either of those, you can leave the call and just hop onto our Facebook page and watch it live there, or our YouTube channel. It's up to you, but you're most welcome to stay. And that's all I have for now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Glenn. Well, we were very pleased when our speaker tonight accepted the invitation to make a presentation for Heritage Talks Online on behalf of the Château Ramezay. Bruno Paul Stenson is a social historian who has been giving entertaining lectures since 1984. A fluently bilingual graduate of McGill and Concordia universities, he has earned bachelor's degrees in psychology and in history, a master's degree in history, and a diploma in public relations management. His public education efforts earned him the Museum Volunteer Award from the Canadian Museums Association in 2015, the Sovereign's Medal for Volunteers from the Governor General of Canada in 2016, and the Château Ramezay Centennial Medal from the Château Ramezay Museum, also in 2016. His many lecture topics include social history, sciences, and music. He actually owns and plays some 250 different musical instruments. His talk this evening is called The Château Ramezay, an historic site and museum powered by volunteers. Hi, Bruno, and welcome to Heritage Talks Online.
Good evening, Heather. Thank you very much. Thank you, Glenn. And welcome, everyone, to possibly one of the strangest hours you're going to spend in your life. And if we were doing this live in person, you would have immediately seen the tie that I'm wearing. But because we're on Zoom, it's a little harder to see. So I'm going to have to stand a little closer so you can see that I am wearing a tie with Louis XIV, the longest serving king of New France. Why Louis XIV? Well, that's because our story begins in New France. So here we go, just clean up my screen here, and off we go. We are going back to the early 1700s, when Montreal had a population of approximately 1,500 people living in 150 to 160 houses. The address of the elite among that population was Notre Dame Street, which is here on the map. Now, if there's a gap in the red line, it's because Notre Dame Church was right smack dab in the middle of Notre Dame Street. Among the residents on this street, we find the Sulpicians, who were the seigneurs of the island of Montreal, the Récollets, the Jesuits, Congrégation Notre Dame, all of them religious orders. And then along comes Claude de Ramezay. He was born in 1659 to a noble family of Scottish descent. Ramezay is the Frenchified version of Ramsay, a very Scottish name. Like boys of the elite, he ended up in the military as an officer, arrived in New France in 1685, where he met and married Marie-Charlotte Denis de la Ronde, a girl of an elite family. Ramezay became governor of Trois-Rivières in 1690, a job he kept for almost a decade, then spent twice as long as governor of Montreal, and was even interim governor of New France for a couple of years. And he died in Quebec City in 1724, while still governor of Montreal. The Ramezays had 16 children. Not all of them lived to be adults. All of the boys went into the military. The girls were split between those who became nuns, a noble profession for elite girls at the time, and girls who married into the military. Two of those 16 children stand out. One of them is Louise. She never married, lived to the ripe old age of 71, and she managed the family businesses, which were 3 seigneuries and a sawmill in Chambly. In addition to this, she had her own 2 sawmills and a tannery. She's going to come back into our story in a little while. The other of the 2 children that stick out is Jean-Baptiste Nicolas Roch de Ramezay. Like all of his brothers, he went into the military, and it was he who signed the surrender of Quebec City during the British conquest. A year later, the surrender of Montreal was signed in front of the Château Ramezay, Jean-Baptiste's childhood home. Well, we should find out what this house is all about if it's that important. It was built in 1705-1706 according to plans by architect builder Pierre Couturier. Now, Bear in mind that back then, an architect was someone who could build in stone and draw a very basic pattern that today would be much more complex and we would call blueprints. So the house that he built for Claude de Ramezay was 66 pieds wide and 36 pieds deep. The French pied is so close to the English foot that just pretend it's 66 feet wide and 36 feet deep and you'll be fine. The house was 3 floors high, plus an attic and a basement. Now, the basement is a little odd because Old Montreal is on a hillock, Coteau Saint-Louis, St. Louis Hillock. The front of the Ramezay home is at the crest of the hillock, and the back of the home is further down the hill, such that the basement at the front of the building is underground. The basement at the back of the building is at ground level. The house had a very steep roof, which was typical of European architecture since the Middle Ages. There was also a garden that included a large orchard. Now, you look at the illustration of the house, and this is mostly conjecture. And you think, oh, okay, a chateau, well, that's French for castle. That doesn't look anything like a castle. Well, indeed, chateau is French for castle, but it's also French for manor house. So it's the Ramezay Manor. Claude de Ramezay borrowed 3,400 livres from the Franciscans to build this house. In 2021, 3,400 livres would be just under $175,000. This at a time when stone houses in New France cost anywhere between 450 and 2,000 livres. So Ramezay borrowed from the Franciscans 50% more than what the most expensive stone house cost in New France. And we have no evidence that Ramezay ever paid the Franciscans back. The schnook. So the Ramezay house was built right here in Old Montreal. Those of you who are only vaguely familiar with Old Montreal, the Château Ramezay is right across the street from Montreal City Hall and just a little east of Place Jacques-Cartier. So it should give you a fairly good idea of where the building is located. Now, the Ramezays occupied the house until 1727. This a few years after Claude had died. And then the widow Ramezay decided to rent the house to the government. And it was used as the summer residence / office of Intendant Claude Thomas Dupuis, who served only 2 years because he was absolutely terrible at his job. So he ended up using the house for about a week in the summer of 1727. Madame de Ramezay offered to sell the chateau to Dupuis for 20,000 livres without the orchard. Well, he balked at that price. He said, there's no way a house could cost that much. Well, the house shortly thereafter was valued at 28,250 livres. So she was offering him a good bargain. Well, once he got booted out of office, he was replaced by Gilles Hocquart, who was much better at the job and hung on to the job for some 17 years. And he used the chateau as his summer residence / office every summer from June to August until 1745. In 1745, the house was sold to the Compagnie des Indes, the fur trade company that was headquartered in Nantes. They established continental headquarters in every single one of the cities of New France. Every single one. All 3 of them. Quebec, Trois-Rivières, and Montreal at the Château Ramezay. And the chateau was sold to them by the Ramezay family, and that meant it was sold to them by she who was taking care of the family businesses, that is Louise de Ramezay. While the building was in the hands of the Compagnie des Indes, the fur trade company, there was a fire. The details are somewhat vague, but there appears to have been a fire that will have burned part or all of the roof, maybe the attic, and this encouraged the company in making their repairs to expand the building. So it was expanded to 92 pieds wide and 48 pieds deep. The fire having quite possibly eliminated the attic, the building was just lowered by one floor and given a shallower roof. There is some debate as to how much of Claude de Ramezay's original house is left in the current Château de Ramezay beyond the foundations. In 1764, the house was purchased by William Grant. This is a year after the treaty that settled the 7 Years' War. So now New France is British territory. So William Grant purchased the house and he used it for business. Exactly what he did at the house, we don't really know, but the man dealt in furs, wheat, flour, and fish. So there could have been any of those or a combination or all of them at the chateau. We don't really know. In 1773, Grant rented the chateau to the British government. So this is the second national government to have rented the building. And it became the offices of the governors, including this chap here, Guy Carleton, who had the fortune or misfortune of being the governor when the Americans invaded. Richard Montgomery and 2,000 soldiers captured Montreal in the fall of 1775, and they stayed until late spring of 1776. And they used the chateau as their headquarters. And while it was in American hands, not only Richard Montgomery was there before he went off to Quebec City and died in spectacularly hilarious circumstances, but that's a topic for another lecture. The building also saw the likes of Benedict Arnold and Benjamin Franklin within its walls. Well, once the British chased the invading Americans out, the British took over the chateau for 2 years, just in case the Americans wanted to come back. From 1778 to 1784, the chateau was the home of Governor Frederick Haldimand. Then it became a house, serving a number of government functions, including being the office of Sir John Colborne, the chap you see on the screen. He was the governor and commander-in-chief of British North American forces during the Canadian Revolution. You might know the Canadian Revolution as the rebellions of 1837-38, but trust me, it was a revolution. But that, again, is an entirely different lecture. From 1838 to 1841, the Special Council had its offices in the Château Ramezay, dealing with the fallout of the Revolution. From 1849 to 1855, it became a courthouse. Then it became the headquarters of the Ministry of Public Education. And during that tenure, it became the Jacques Cartier Normal School, that is a teacher training facility. Now, you noticed so far every illustration you've seen of the Château Ramezay is from the front, except for the very first one, which was kind of a three-quarter profile deal. Well, here we're looking at it from the side. We're looking east. The building on the left is the Château Ramezay. What looks like a block tower at the near end of it is actually a staircase that was added to the building. In the background is an extension that was added for the normal school. That has since been demolished, as has the staircase that had been added. Now, from 1884 to 1889, Laval University had its faculties of medicine and law in the Château Ramezay. They then moved to Mount Royal, where they became the University of Montreal. From 1889 to 1893, the Château Ramezay was a courthouse again. And then it lay empty and awaiting demolition, which is absolutely shocking when you realize, as I'm sure you have, that the Château Ramezay is the belly button of Canadian history. So there's a group of collectors of antiquities and coins that got their knickers in a twist over this. They are the Antiquarian and Numismatic Society of Montreal. The government was going to sell the Château Ramezay at auction, and that would inevitably have led to it being demolished and replaced by something modern. So the building was bought by the city of Montreal and rented to the Antiquarian and Numismatic Society of Montreal, which had lobbied for preserving the building. And in 1895, the Antiquarian and Numismatic Society, which had been founded in 1862, created the Château Ramezay Museum. And among the first collections of the Château Ramezay Museum are extensive collections of coins, because the Antiquarian and Numismatic Society was Canada's first coin club, and they were the publishers of the Canadian Antiquarian and Numismatic Journal. And you see right on the cover, the Château Ramezay. So this new Château Ramezay Museum was a museum fairly typical of its era. You see 3 rooms here in the museum. On the left side of the top row is one of the museum rooms. This was the First Nations room, and you'll notice there are canoes suspended on the ceiling. Top row right is the portrait gallery. Now, this is my kind of museum. You stand still in one spot for half an hour, and you have enough things all crammed together to keep you entertained. They also had a library. That's what we see in the bottom photo. So over the decades, the Antiquarian and Numismatic Society and its Château Ramezay Museum transformed the building from this to this. It's the old kitchen in the basement. And I'm sure somebody's going to want to know, what's that barrel that's stuck in the wall? That's a dog wheel. That's how they turned the spit in front of that cooking fire. The spit is connected by a cable, which we can just make out in the photo. The cable runs up to a pulley on the side of that barrel. You put a dog inside the barrel. The dog breed is called a turnbull or turnspit. You hang meat in front of the barrel, and the dog, not necessarily too bright, wants to get at the meat, and he starts running in the barrel like a hamster in its wheel in a cage, and that turns the spit. Modern technology in New France. In 1903, the 2 towers were added to the chateau. They're both on the east side of the building, one at the front, one at the back. After all, it is a chateau, and what's a castle without towers? In 1929, Montreal ceded the chateau to the Antiquarian and Numismatic Society of Montreal. And that same year, the Château Ramezay became the first building classified as an historic monument by the Quebec Historic Monuments Commission. And 20 years later, it was recognized in the same fashion by the federal government. The most recent major change occurred in the year 2000 when a garden was added. Now, in this photo, the big building you see in the middle, that's Montreal City Hall. The Château Ramezay is the smaller building closer to us. So let's zoom into that. And when I became a guide at the Château Ramezay, this is what the chateau looked like, with an absolutely shameful double-decker parking lot coming so close to the back of the building, you could actually stand in the parking lot and touch the wall of the chateau. Well, that parking lot was demolished, and this has taken its place. It's not a reproduction of Ramezay's garden. We can no longer build that big a garden in Old Montreal. The space no longer exists. So the Château Ramezay's garden is 1/6 the size of Claude de Ramezay's garden. But it's a darn sight better than that double-decker parking lot. It even has a fountain that features a ram spitting water into a basin. And the ram was borrowed from Claude de Ramezay's personal coat of arms that you see on the right. Is the ram there as a wink and a nod to his Scottish Ramsay ancestry? Who knows? The garden, like the rest of the chateau, can be rented. And here we see it all set up for a rental. There have been weddings and all kinds of receptions in the garden. And inside the building, we see two different rooms here, the fancy mahogany paneled salle de Nantes on the right, and one of the other display rooms on the left. Those can all be rented for special events of all sorts. The rooms have even been used for professional photography and filming. So print ads or filmed commercials or television shoots. And if your children or grandchildren have never been to the Château Ramezay, well, the best way to get them in there is to host their birthday party there, which is a possibility. You can actually rent the chateau for a birthday party with costumed animators. So there's the building, but what on earth do we do there, and who does the doing? Well, the volunteers have been at the Château Ramezay from the start. The Antiquarian and Numismatic Society of Montreal has always been a volunteer organization. So as soon as the Antiquarian and Numismatic Society got their hands on the building, there were volunteers doing things in there. Now, typical of learned societies of its day, the Antiquarian and Numismatic Society of Montreal was an all-male club. So a women's branch was founded. And of course, the women's branch had only women, mainly wives of the Antiquarian and Numismatic Society members. The women couldn't be members of the society directly, but they could be members of the women's branch. And they organized fundraising events, staffed the gift shop, and so on. And one of the items we have in the collection at the museum is this portrait of the very first president of the women's branch, Louise Harwood MacDonald. When I started guiding 25 years ago, the women's branch still existed. But that sort of thinking was on its way out and was actually gone in most societies. So the women's branch was replaced by the Volunteers Association. Now, the Volunteers Association is a small group. It's approximately 10 people now, and they work on specific projects like lectures, fundraising activities, and so on. They even help with some administrative tasks. And they are mainly former guides and friends of the museum. There comes a point where the guides have been guiding for so long, they're just tired of doing it, or they have some physical impediment that has crept in with age, but they still want to help out the museum. So they could be members of this Volunteers Association. There are volunteers on the board of directors. It's an all volunteers group, as is the board of trustees. And the presidents of each of the 3 volunteer associations at the museum, that is the Volunteers Association we just saw, plus the 2 guiding associations, have their respective presidents sitting on the board of directors. So who are these guides? What are the guiding associations? Well, they were founded in 1975. First, a group of English-speaking people wanted to guide at the Château Ramezay, and very shortly thereafter, a group of French people said, well, we should do that as well. So the 2 associations were founded separately, each with its own board of directors, procedures, and organization. So there's a French guiding association and there's an English guiding association. Now, the Anglophone guides, pre-pandemic, numbered about 50 people. That number might have fallen closer to 30 by now. We'd very much like to bring it back up to 50. Hint, hint. The main tasks of the Anglophone guides are to participate in the school program, the weekend guiding, the summer guiding, which is not just on weekends, but 7 days a week, and special tours. We'll find out in a bit what all of those different kinds of tours are. The English guides have a variety of people, from senior citizens all the way to university students. Their training involves an introduction to the museum's director and head of education. They get the guide's manual, which is an introduction to the museum prepared by the museum. They also receive museum content relevant to the museum's participation in history and the broader history that was happening at the same time in New France. And this is all given to them during 9 lectures of theoretical training, all in one continuous session. The trainees get coffee, tea, and cookies during their training. We involve the trainees in some of the museum's public activities, and we even invite the trainees on outings. The Francophone guides also numbered about 50 people pre-COVID, and their numbers may have tumbled down closer to 30 as well since COVID began. So they would also like some additional volunteers. Hint, hint, redux. Their main tasks are the school program, weekend guided tours, summer guided tours, and special tours, just like the English-speaking guides. The Francophone guides are mainly senior citizens. So far, they've tended to attract fewer younger people than the Anglophone guides have. Their training also involves an introduction to the museum's director and head of education. They also get a copy of the guide's manual that was prepared by the museum. And they get training in content that is museum relevant and New France relevant. And this is done in 9 lectures of theoretical training, divided into 2 sessions. One session for those guides who would like to do school tours, and one session for those who would like to do general tours. So this emphasis on school tours and general tours is unique to the French guides. The English guides don't do this. We just throw everything into one pot and stir vigorously. The participants in the French guide training are invited to have lunch together at each training session. And they observe volunteers in action to see if this is something they would like to do. I'm sure everyone at this Zoom call tonight has had the experience of thinking they'd really like to do a certain activity, only to discover once they've started doing it that, nope, this is not really for me. Well, the French guides try to avoid that by having the trainees observe guides in action as early as possible. And the trainees get paired with a mentor. So they're taken very much in hand by the Francophone Guides Association. Now, the tours themselves. Well, we have general tours that are offered to the public. Who are the public? They are tourists, they are locals, they are anybody and everybody who happens by. So our weekend tours are exactly that. The English tours are given at 12 and 2, and they should be resuming shortly-ish, having been suspended all during COVID. And for those tours, it's anybody who happens to show up at noon, anybody who happens to show up at 2. Then there are what we call special tours. These are group tours. They could be people who are in town for a convention. They could be people who are taking adult education classes, for instance, English second language classes. They could be packaged tours where you will have a group coming in from China and their guide in Montreal takes them to the Château Ramezay. We take over this group of tourists, show them around the Château Ramezay, and then we give them back to their guide. So these tours are booked tours. So the organizers of these tours have to contact the Château Ramezay, let them know they would like to come, such a date, such a time, can we have guides? We also do tours of the garden. In fact, we are in the process of training garden guides. They will guide only in the garden. They will not guide inside the chateau. They will only guide outdoors in the garden. In fact, I should say gardens, plural. We have an English-style garden at the front of the building and a magnificent French-style garden at the back. So we've got guided tours going on in these 3 pictures. To be quite honest, the one of me all by myself on the left, that was faked. That was staged. But the other 2 are genuine. The one on the right is a Romanian choir that came to Montreal several years ago. They came to the Château Ramezay. I gave them a tour. And in a note, one of them thanked me profusely for showing them the aphrodisiac plants in the garden. You never know who you're going to get on these tours. The school tours, as the name implies, are for school children. They reserve date and time, and the guides will show them various aspects of New France through activities. So the 2 pictures on the bottom, the one on the left, that's me and another guide who was trained with me in '96, showing the First Nations activities. We're having the children work a fire drill. And on the right, you see children who are learning to write with a quill pen. And these are activities that were or still are featured in the school tours. We also do special activities. For instance, those of you who are from Quebec, you're familiar with Museums Day, which is held in spring every year. And museums in Montreal that participate in Museums Day are open for free. And we have guides at the Château Ramezay, as they do in all the other museums, to show different things to these visitors. And particular year when the picture on the left was taken, I was showing period musical instruments and playing them for the visitors. The two other pictures are of our guides in Plattsburgh, New York, for the celebration of the Battle of Plattsburgh, the War of 1812. Now, of course, nobody from the Château Ramezay was at the War of 1812 in Plattsburgh, but it was a war between the United States and Canada, as they were back then, so we participate in that activity as well. We've had poetry readings. The picture on the left is a poetry reading accompanied by music. And we've had music instrument demonstrations on weekends. That's me again with the lute and several other instruments that were played back in the day. Now, among the benefits, it's not just work. There are benefits to guiding at the Château Ramezay, and one of them is parties. So we've got 3 pictures here of Christmas parties at the Château Ramezay, where we've had volunteers playing musical instruments, singing, and shamelessly doing a conga line, as you see in the bottom picture. We also go on outings. So in these 3 pictures, the one on the left, you see us at another museum. The picture on the right is us partaking in a calèche tour when we went to visit Old Montreal and the Old Port. And the picture on the bottom is us attending a tour given by one of our members. For a few years we did that. We would have a member who knew a particular area in Old Montreal quite well, or beyond Old Montreal, and would give us a tour there. The tour that I gave my poor victims was a bicycle tour of Old Saint-Eustache, and we went there on bike. There's also recognition. The museum hosts a reception for us during Volunteers Week every spring, and a Christmas luncheon as well. This is in addition to the party that we stage for ourselves every Christmas. There are also pins recognizing the number of years that we've been guiding. And there can even be medals. This medal was given to me for my 20 years of volunteering at the Château Ramezay, doing a very, very long list of things in addition to just guiding. The recognition sometimes comes from the visitors. On the left is a letter that was sent to me by the parents of a child, and in the letter, they say that I brought history alive for their child, and they couldn't imagine a better way of getting into the topic. That's the sort of recognition that keeps a lot of us going. The Vermont maple syrup, well, that came from a visitor as well. You see, this fella owns a sugar bush in Vermont, and he was convinced that his maple syrup is of higher quality than that which we have in Quebec. My telling him that Quebec actually supplies 80% of the world's maple syrup did not deter him, and he mailed me a bottle of maple syrup after he got back home. Now, traditionally, we guides will put the tips that we receive into the donation box at the museum. But I thought, if I pour the maple syrup into the donation box, the director will probably get very upset. So I kept it. It was actually quite good. Not as good as ours, but still quite good. There are challenges, despite all of the jolly things that I've just told you. The average guide has been with the museum now for about 8 years. Some guides have been with the museum for more than 25, but the museum does need more guides than we are currently recruiting. Recruitment is done literally all year. The museum receives requests for information about guiding 12 months of the year. Those requests sometimes come by phone. They can come via our website, which you see here on the screen. They can come from personal visits. People just show up at the front desk and ask, how can I volunteer here? But we still need more. The Montreal website has an ad for Château Ramezay guides. In fact, I ended up at the Château Ramezay because of a volunteer bureau ad in the Gazette 25 years ago. We also go to university volunteering fairs to recruit volunteers. So that's McGill and Concordia. And we hold an open house every year when people can just come to the museum and see what volunteering there is all about. There's a problem, of course, with aging of the volunteers. And we've had a problem with cultural uniformity. The volunteers at the museum have tended to be all of one group. I'll let you guess which one as you look at that picture on the screen. So we are trying to diversify the volunteer team by adding more youth, adding people from other cultural communities. And we have some now, and they can become ambassador guides for the Château Ramezay. That is, guides who can address specific cultural or linguistic communities. There's also the problem, for lack of a better word, of rejuvenating the activities. We want to ensure that the school tours meet curriculum needs, for instance. And there's also the problem, for lack of a better word, of evaluating the volunteers, ensuring that the volunteers remain up to date in methods and content. An example of changing content would be our view of Dollard des Ormeaux, not the city, but the man. He was originally viewed as the hero who saved Montreal. We now see him more as the schnook who was trying to steal furs from the First Nations. So we need to remain current on evolving historical perspectives. That doesn't mean we have to dress modern, though, as you can see in this picture of me. That's me with the portrait of Jacques Cartier hanging in the Château Ramezay. For clarity, I'm the one dressed in blue. We also have to face the changing mentalities regarding volunteering. With the extinction of the bored housewife, there are fewer and fewer and fewer housewives looking for something to do with their time from Monday to Friday. And there's a tendency now among people who volunteer to volunteer only short term, or to volunteer for a very specific task. For example, they will volunteer, but only to translate texts, or volunteer only to take pictures of items that we're cataloging in the collection. Those volunteers are welcome. They are more than welcome. But that doesn't serve us very well in terms of guides. So yes, we want the photographers, we want the translators, we want all the other volunteers, but we really need guides. Now, if this has inspired anybody to think, at least think, of volunteering at the Château Ramezay, how about this? We're number one, according to a lot of organizations. We have received a fairly lengthy list of awards from the Quebec government, from a number of societies. We were even chosen as one of the 14 Canadian sites listed in a book called 1001 Historic Sites You Must See Before You Die. How's that for importance? We got a recognition certificate from the Daughters of the American Revolution. Why? Remember when Montreal was American for 7 months? The Daughters of the American Revolution recognize buildings and such that were part of the American Revolution, and that includes the Château Ramezay. We got a certificate of excellence from National Geographic. And last year, in 2021, we even got an award by some outfit called the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. Fancy that. We cannot achieve anything near that without very tight collaboration between the 3 volunteer associations and the museum itself. And even in preparing this presentation, I got photos from the Château Ramezay, but I also got photos from a number of my fellow guides. So big thank you to Carly, Anna, Cheryl, and Sharon for supplying photographs to me. Thank you very much, everybody. Please come visit the Château Ramezay. And if you've already been, come again. You might get a different guide and different stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruno. That was fabulous. What a delightful presentation. And before we move any further, before I say anything else, I know Glenn is just going to come in quickly to instruct people how to ask you questions.
All right, great job, Bruno. Really enjoyed that. So the chat box is your best friend. You maybe saw a couple of chat messages popping up during Bruno's talk. That's down at the bottom. So if you have a question, you can just type, I have a question, and then we'll turn on your mic for you and bring you on camera and you can ask Bruno your question. Or if you're shy to come on camera, just type your question. We'll read it on your behalf. If you know where the raise hand button is in Zoom, not everyone does, it's under the reactions pane or the reactions section. You can raise your hand that way. If you're on Facebook, I will do my best to check in there to see if there are any questions, although it's a bit tricky to jump back and forth between Zoom and Facebook, but I will do my best. So just another reminder, this is being broadcast and recorded. So if you come on camera, you're agreeing to be part of the broadcast. Okay, so I'll pass it back to you, Heather.
Okay, great. Bruno, a few years ago, I had the pleasure of going to the Château Ramezay, and I heard Louise Brazo talking about the program, and I was so impressed by the whole organization. I was overwhelmed. I didn't understand how on earth I could ever create a volunteer program like that in the museum that I was working in at the time. But your talk tonight showed me that you work so hard, but a volunteer program has to be evolving and a breathing thing to adjust with the time, adjust with how volunteers want to work, and if you could give advice for maybe the small groups that are out there watching tonight, what would it be, do you think, if you were trying to get a volunteer program off the ground? What do you think the first thing would be that you would suggest to people? It might not be an easy answer.
The first thing, get volunteers.
Yeah.
You can't have a volunteer organization if you don't have the volunteers.
But not so easily done, though, is it?
But really what you need to know before you get the volunteers is, what do you need the volunteers to do? You can't put out a call for volunteers and then expect them to know what needs to be done, because they might be entirely new to your organization and they won't know what needs to be done. They don't know what jobs are already being done by salaried employees. I might love to be the director of the museum. It's not a volunteer job and it's already been taken. So task number 1, what do you want the volunteers to do? Task number 2, how can they do that? Can they do that from home? Do they have to be at the institution? Do they need some sort of support? And the support could be a room. If you don't have a room for them to be, and they need one, your program's not going to work. There's nowhere for your volunteers to be. Do they need financial support? Do they need equipment? Do they need a computer? Or will pencil and paper do? So you need to think of that next. Then you get your volunteers.
I noticed you said that recruitment goes on all year long, and I never thought of it that way, that it's an ongoing process. You just can't have a one general call, help, we need volunteers. I don't think that works ever, does it? No one responds to something like that.
No, and if the best volunteer you could ever have missed the call, they'd gone to the bathroom when you made the call for volunteers, you're going to miss that person. And that might be the best volunteer you could ever hope to have.
Yeah.
So it has to be an ongoing process. But at the Château Ramezay, we do not train volunteers 12 months of the year. We train them once, ever so often twice a year, depending on how many volunteer applications we get. But typically, it's once a year that we do the training.
Okay. I see Mary Ellen has asked the question, when is your open house usually held?
The open house is usually held in warm weather. But if memory serves, it's during the school year to be able to hit up students. Sharon, since you're using the chat, unmute and let us know. Oh, Louise is telling us that it's end of September and in March. So there you go. Warm weather, but while the schools are open. For those who are wondering who those people are, Sharon is one of our volunteer guides and one of the people who supplied me with photos. And Louise is our very recently former head of education. After 9 years at the Chateau, she is back at Parks Canada.
Oh, very good. I wondered where she went. Now, how do you, are you sort of, well, you did allude to it, but I just wondered if you could reemphasize how you keep your volunteers. I mean, the age of volunteers, you know, donating time, 25 years. I find that it's really hard to keep volunteers in an organization. So do you have any tips about that?
Well, speaking only for myself, it's amazing what you end up doing when you're too lazy to quit. But for everybody else, feed them. So having recognition, the soirees, dinners, that helps. It makes them feel appreciated. You know, it's not just that they're scoring a free dinner. It's that they feel appreciated. The same thing with the pins that we give the volunteers, with a different pin for each chunk of 5 years that they've been guiding. Now, this is a form of recognition. And we also have the outings. Right? Remember that we organize outings. And the volunteers on their own might never go to these places, or they might not do these activities. But if they can do it in a group with people that they have quite possibly come to value as friends, then that is added impetus to continue volunteering, to be with these people that you have come to know through social activities.
Yeah, I see that Louise said the Chateau is like a social club
Yeah.
where your friends get together and you you have a good time, and you share your expertise, and how wonderful that is. And you've created a community. I guess it's really one of the secrets of your success.
Well, the woman who was the president of the English Guides Association when I did my training in '96, she and I became very good friends right up until she died a couple of years ago. We would phone each other. We would talk about Chateau related things, and that is meant in the broader sense. So we would be talking about history, but we were also talking about astronomy and politics and all kinds of things. She was a former antique dealer. We were talking about antiques.
Is becoming a guide something you call up the chateau and say, I want to be a guide, and then you go in for an interview? The first step is that's what it is? Yeah.
They put you on a list of potential victims, volunteers. And then they call you up when comes time for the training. Then you do the 9 weeks of training, and then you do a first year of, shall we call it, apprentice guiding. And if you're still around after that, you get your nice shiny gold ID tag, and you're off to the races.
Neat. I was interested in, you said there's an English garden and a French garden, and
Yes.
the volunteers will only volunteer in the gardens. Can you tell me the difference? What are
there's a very special crew of guides that are being trained just for the garden. Some of those will be regular Chateau guides, so they'll be doing both. But most of this crew is going to be people who are just going to be guiding in the garden, and some of them are coming from the Montreal Botanical Gardens.
Oh, neat.
They volunteer there, or they're members of the Friends of the Botanical Gardens, and they think, oh, cool, we get to guide in this New France garden. The garden at the front is very different from the garden at the back. The one at the front has been there since dinosaurs roamed the earth, and it's an English style garden. English style gardens look more natural, in quotation marks. And there are winding paths, no straight paths in English style gardens, and typically short plants near the path, then medium-sized plants behind those, tall plants behind those. But it looks natural, even though nature doesn't organize plants that way next to the path. At the back, it's all perfectly straight paths. In fact, they are cruciform paths, that is, paths that form the shape of a cross. Straight path meeting straight path with symmetry on either side. And if you go to Versailles, you get the gardens with straight paths, geometric patterns in the plants. Well, we have a section of our garden that is planted in geometric patterns that change from one year to the next, according to the whims of the City of Montreal gardeners who take care of our gardens.
Were the gardens, were they planted based on information of the original gardens of the chateau at all, or?
All we have is a very vague plan that shows where plots were, but we don't have a list. There's no list of plants that Madame de Ramezay will have drawn up and said, all right, Claude, let's go buy seeds for these. That doesn't exist. So what's in the garden are plants that we know typically grew in the gardens of the people of New France. We know from some documents what the elite were eating in New France. So we have a hybrid garden that includes some plants that only the elite would eat. That includes asparagus and artichokes.
Oh,
The poor
interesting.
did not eat those plants. Artichokes, because they occupy 1 square yard or 1 square meter of garden space. The poor don't have enough space to waste on a plant that will give you only enough food to cover the palm of your hand in 1 square yard of space. And the asparagus, well, it doesn't give you any food for the first year or two, up to 4. So the poor aren't going to plant those. On the other hand, the poor might plant corn, and they might plant the other 2 plants associated with corn, the 3 sisters from First Nations mythology. Well, the elite considered that it was up to the First Nations to eat like them, not like them to eat like the First Nations. So even though these plants are highly nutritious, highly productive, the elite would not touch them. So you would find them in the gardens of the poor, not in the gardens of the rich. We've got everything.
How interesting. I was interested too in the Louise de Ramezay, and I mean, was that common for a woman to be a businesswoman back in the day?
Not at all. Unless she was widowed, she might take over her late husband's business, either by doing it herself if she had the skills, or by hiring someone to take over physically for the late husband, but she would be doing the books and pulling the purse strings.
Really
But for
quite
someone,
remarkable.
yeah, but for someone like Louise to not only run the family businesses, but have additional businesses of her own, and she never married. This was very, very rare.
I suppose that's why she had power, because she wasn't married, huh? Like a widow would have been more independent as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and she
Okay.
came from the elite family, right? So, you know, she had, there was power implied in her right from the start, just being in the Ramezay family. But then she never married, but didn't become a nun.
Yeah, unusual too, I
Yeah.
suppose, huh?
Yeah. So the boys are in the army. They don't have time to look after the business. And her sisters, well, they're either nuns, so they're taking care of their own religious communities. And her other sisters, well, they married military men, so they're taking care of their own families. No, we need someone to take care of the family businesses. Louise, work.
No, I suppose that's probably it. She was the one that had time, you know, and had some skills. So
Yeah.
good on her.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah. It's just an amazing story that you've told us this evening, Bruno. And I just to think this house has been occupied for the centuries that it has, that it almost was knocked to the ground. Unbelievable. And then this wonderful society saved it, and the volunteers that have put their effort and their heart into it for all that time. It's quite a remarkable story.
And we know that if the Château Ramezay had been American, so if we hadn't chased the Americans out, that building would have been declared a historical treasure long before the Antiquarian and Numismatic Society got its hands on it. There would never have been any question of it being under threat of demolition had it been American.
Isn't that something? So we were just sort of backwards in our thinking at the time.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, pop quiz for you. But anybody out there who wants to hazard a guess, do so, unmute. In all of old Montreal, how many buildings date back to New France?
Come on, people, answer.
There are a few hundred buildings in old Montreal. How many date back to New France?
Gosh.
I bet some of the guides know this.
Yes, the guides.
You're not cheating.
Know, actually.
I think I have it so they can unmute themselves now. Yeah. So if you tried to unmute yourself before, we have a hand up. Hold on, let's see what that is. Let's see how I figure out this works.
Sandra.
Oh, Sandra.
Okay.
I know of only 3, and 2 of them are religious buildings that have survived. One of them is, along with the Château Ramezay, there is one, I think it's the Grey Nuns. It's a religious order. And that one's still there. Then there's the seminary that still has a little garden. Down a bit farther, St. Paul Street. Gosh, I've been shut away because of COVID. I can't remember where things are, and I know it well. There are those 3. There's also little bits left, if it counts, not really as a building, of the wall that wasn't very successful, but it still shows the Champ de Mars, little bits. It shows Gros de Liry's wall. I'm trying to think. I don't think there could be more than 5. There might be a couple of others, but I only know of 3 that go back to the French regime.
Okay, does anybody else want to hazard a guess?
There's Sharon Todd has her hand up.
Sharon, what do you think?
Sandra's pretty close. I'm just remembering from Bruno leads a tour for the volunteer guides. He leads a tour to each of these buildings in Old Montreal. It's a fantastic tour. I think I've been lucky enough to go on it twice. I don't know how I managed that.
You just didn't understand it the first time, Sharon.
There's only 6, correct?
That's right. And you were on the tour twice because you didn't understand it the first time, Sharon.
Oh, yeah, maybe. But I got 6.
It is 6.
Incredible.
In all of Old Montreal, there are only 6 buildings left from New France.
Crazy. Astonishing.
Yep, they are the
Wow.
Château Ramezay. No matter how much or how little of Ramezay's house remains in the building that's there today, the building that is there today, with the exception of those silly towers that were added, that was built during the French regime. There is a cooper's house, that is a barrel maker's house on St. Paul. There is the little pink house, the little pink wooden house, the northeastern end of Old Montreal, that dates back to New France. There is indeed the seminary, the Sulpician Seminary. There is the Grey Nuns building on Saint Pierre, and there is a wood dealer's house. In fact, the widow Ramezay forged a business partnership with him after Claude died, and his house, an enormous thing, is still standing. And that's it.
Gosh. Wow, good guess then, Sandra. I never would have thought that few. My
It's
goodness.
also a fake, right, Bruno? There's a fake.
Yes, yes. There is a fake one right across from the Bon Secours Chapel. There's a building that shamelessly puts the date 17 some during the French regime as their construction date. It's a bold-faced lie.
Crazy. So it's really a miracle that it's standing then, or it. Yeah.
Yeah,
My
absolutely.
goodness. Well, I guess we'll bring it to a close. I don't think there are any other questions. Are there, Glenn?
No.
That you can see? Nothing from on Facebook? Well, Bruna, this has been just wonderful. And thank you so much for telling us about the Chateau at first, and then the wonderful program that you have there. I knew from listening to Louise many years ago that it was an astounding volunteer program. I didn't realize it had won so many awards, and it's really quite well deserved. It's and your passion for the program is very evident, and it's really exciting to hear it. And I'm so delighted that you were able to join us tonight. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you to all of you for joining us tonight as well. I really appreciate the time that you've given to Heritage Talks tonight and listening to Bruno. You may be interested to know that our next talk will be on February 27th. That's on Sunday, February 27th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And we're going to hear Sunita Nigam from the Eastern Townships Resource Center talking about Black history in the Eastern Townships. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that. And again, if you'd like to watch this broadcast again, you can go to the Heritage Talks Facebook page. The recording will be there, so you can watch it again or watch any of our other programs. So again, thank you very much. Thank you, Glenn, for keeping everything on track for us. And until next time, thank you for joining Heritage Talks. Good night.
Bye-bye, everybody. Hope to see you at the Chateau.
Indeed. That was great, Bruno. Thank you.
Oh, it was my pleasure indeed.
Yeah.
It went really well, and you and Glenn did a great job. So
Thank
fantastic.
you. No, it's great. It's perfect. I'm going to send you a little note after. It would be great if you were part of our Heritage Talks, or what we call our Speakers Bureau. And we just put the people who have spoken on Heritage Talks up on our website.